Hey guys, it's Brandon. Just wanted to take a look at a game that was played today at the World Mind Games competition in Beijing, China, which is currently going on now. The World Mind Games, just to give you a brief summary, is a big competition where they're playing lots of different sort of brain games, like chess, obviously, Go, Bridge. I'm not sure what else, since I don't pay close attention to those other games, but for the chess, they're doing a few days of rapid, and some days of blitz, and some days of blindfold chess. And a lot of the top players in the world have showed up for this event. Lots of 2,700 and above rated players. Hikaru Nakamura, world number 3 at the moment on the live ratings. Levon Aronian. Alexander Grischuk, Alexander Morozevich from Russia, Anish Giri, I think, is there. So a lot of really strong players showed up for this tournament, and they've done the rapid section so far. I'm not sure how many more days or if they do any more of the rapids, but this game was played today, and it was between Alexander Grischuk on the white pieces, FIDE rating 2760. And Hikaru Nakamura, FIDE rating 27, high 60s, maybe 2770. And so yeah, very close rating matchup, and it turned out to be a pretty interesting game. So rapid time controls, I'm not exactly sure what the time controls were. I can't seem to find it, but I'm guessing that means probably less than half an hour, maybe 25 minutes per move, and possibly some increment. But not one of the games where you can spend a long time calculating variations. And I'll try to stay away from variations as much as possible in this. But okay, Grischuk with the white pieces played the move 1e4. And Nakamura, surprisingly, I guess, but maybe not so surprisingly, played one knight f6 in response to e4, so the Alekhine defense. And those of you who have seen Nakamura playing on the ICC or anything like that are well aware that he, in rapid and blitz time control games, is perfectly willing to just play random openings and maybe not so usually solid openings out of the book and rely on his tactical brilliance to sort of get him through these games. And so by playing knight f6, you're provoking white to move forward with e5, which is he does. Now knight d5, d4, and this is sort of a hypermodern opening where, in a sense, black is letting white build up a big pawn center, possibly with c4 in some lines as well, and decides that he'll attack that center later. Actually kind of gets to it right away with the move d6, so putting pressure on e5. Knight f3, now d takes e and knight takes e. I don't know any really theory at all about the Alekhine defense, so I won't comment on much theory here. But black having a little bit more space and getting this knight here into the center. c6 is now played, and bishop e2, g6, knight d2, and now knight f4, attacking the bishop. And again, I don't know the theory of this opening, so this may all be theory, but it seems kind of funny because this knight has made 1, 2, 3 moves, and soon makes a 4th in the opening, so kind of violating rules in the chess openings to say, try not to move your pieces more than once before you get the rest of them out. But in any case, Grischuk doesn't seem to want to give up the white square bishop yet, so he plays bishop c4, putting pressure on f7, bishop e6, and now this knight is moved again, so 4 times this knight is moved. But in return, black has traded off a powerful bishop. This knight is nicely posted here, sort of putting pressure on this d4 point. And white doesn't have a huge lead in development, but he does have a nice knight here on e6. So white plays now queen f3, more pressure on f7, threatening mate in 1, so something has to be done about that. So f6 is played. Kind of looks a little ugly, but and maybe it is a little ugly. It turns a little ugly for Nakamura pretty quickly. Grischuk plays queen b3, attacking the knight, and Naka and offering this pawn here on d4, which Naka takes. With queen takes d4, excuse me. And now what was played here is knight df3 attacking the queen. Just note that this move here, queen takes e6, is probably not what white is looking for, because after queen takes e5 check, this position is a pawn up for black with not a whole lot going on for white in terms of compensation. Okay, it's a double pawn and maybe it can be blockaded and all that, but black is certainly much better in this type of position. So that's not what he was looking for. He was looking to keep queens on the board. So queen takes d4, knight df3, tempo on the queen, queen check, bishop e3, just blocking the check, and now Naka goes in for this exchange of prisoners here. And what we have is sort of a position where white has a lead in development, having 3 pieces out to the 1 piece out for black, and the king is looking a little bit shaky here. There's pressure on this d5 pawn. Maybe the knight can hop into g4 at some point, putting pressure on f7. So for a pawn, white's got a lead in development, and the king's still stuck in the center. It could be dangerous for white. Excuse me, for black. So let's see what happens. Naka plays knight to d7, defending the pawn, possibly preparing queenside castling. And Grischuk castled queenside, bringing a rook to the d file with pressure on the knight right away. So something has to be done about that. Maybe castling here was an option, castling queenside with the rook to defend the knight. Not sure. But what instead Naka decided to do was play queen to f5, protecting the knight through the queen and offering the exchange of queens. Logical. He's up a pawn and wants to try to eliminate the threats in the attack. So just defending it and offering the queen trade, which Grischuk is not interested in. He plays queen b3. And now Naka still has some moves to get fully developed. He has to get this bishop out, and he has to castle. So he plays knight b6, looking to put this knight into d5. So maybe he could put pressure on this bishop on e3 and have the opportunity to castle queenside. Right now, castling queenside is not legal because the rook is stopping the king from crossing the d-file. And actually offering this knight and the pawn back, whereas if bishop takes knight here, this pawn is hanging, but perhaps he didn't want to give counterplay on the a-file. This pawn might be taken in the future, and in any case, the a-file is open against the white king, so that could be dangerous. So he didn't take the knight on b6. Instead played knight g5. Now, Nakamura continued with his plan of getting this knight centralized and blocking the d-file. He played knight to d5. And now here came an interesting moment in the game. This pawn on b7 is hanging and could be taken, but once again I suspect that it wasn't taken because Grischuk didn't want to give at some future point an open b-file for black to attack down in this game. Instead, what he did was very interesting. He played rook takes d5, sacrificing the exchange for a pawn. So he had lost a pawn earlier, so we have a position where pawns are now equal again, but white is down a clear exchange, a rook for a knight. So these pawns are a little bit broken. The king is still in the center. And what's more is what he was looking for with this move is the really nice square e6 for this knight. With that exchange, he guaranteed this knight a very nice post on e6, where it will be covering a lot of open files from stopping the rooks from getting to. So rook c8 was played. This is a tempo gaining move, development move with tempo, because the rook and the queen are coordinating, threatening mate on c3, on c2. So he defends that with c3. And now bishop h6 and knight e6, landing that knight on that beautiful square. And you can see now that these are the 3 open files for black. And the knight is nicely controlling 2 of them, so that only a rook can land on the c-file. So it's really cutting off some development possibilities for this rook. So I would say there's definite compensation here for white, in the sense that the black king is still in the center. He has a really great knight posted. It's not an outpost. Technically, there's no pawn supporting it, but as long as the queen keep supporting it. The knight can stay there and limit the development of this rook, and also note that it stops the king from castling. Well, castling that way is illegal because this rook moves, but he won't be able to castle kingside either because he would have to cross this square controlled by the knight. Note also that this is a fork square for the knight, so Naka has to be careful about what he does with this bishop. Fortunately for him, bishop takes e3 is okay. There's no knight thing here yet because of the check. So that move came with check. So f takes e3, queen f6, just guarding the g7 fork square and keeping an eye on this knight so the queen can't go anywhere. And now rook d1, so taking control of the d file. So compensation for white, will it be enough? h5 played by black, and now queen b5 check. Queen d7 check looked dangerous to me at first, but then when I looked a little further, I thought after king f7 threatening to take this knight, there's not really much here in terms of play for... In fact, that knight really doesn't have anywhere to go. It can't go to either of these squares. I guess it could go here, but what's it really doing there? Can't come here. So he would have to defend the knight again with queen d5. And note that this really does defend the knight, because if queen takes e6, then rook f1 check is nasty, because the king can no longer maintain defense of the queen, so once the king moves, the queen just falls, and then it's queen for rook. So queen d7 check doesn't really do much. Queen b5 check was chosen instead, and now Naka has two options. The computers like rook f6, rook c6, blocking the check, walking into a pin but blocking the check. He instead chose the move king f7, which walks into rook f1, which looks like it's winning the queen, but when you shake out all the material here, after queen check, takes, check, king takes knight on e6, we're left with a situation where it's two rooks versus the queen. So usually the two rooks versus the queen is a big advantage for the side with the two rooks. But in this situation, it's not quite so easy, because the king is slightly open, and there are some weak pawns that can be targeted by the queen. If it was a very nice pawn structure and the king was very safe, then the two rooks are usually better than the queen. You know, maybe not necessarily winning, but there would be some work to do, but definitely usually better. In this case, there's targets and such, and the queen's active, the king's a little open, so this rook is not developed, so white has some time to try to drum some stuff up. He plays queen d3, now king f6, just stepping out of any checks, possibly along this diagonal. These pawns are giving the king a little bit more shelter here, like on this diagonal. And now he plays queen d7, pressure on this rook and attacking the b pawn, rook b8. And now this is what I'm saying now. It looks like the two rooks would be better, but okay, this rook right now is tied down because there's some targets here. By the way, the king on f6 also maintains protection of some of these weak pawns. So, moving on, king c2 was played, and now black finally gets his last piece into the game. Rook hc8, a4 was played, and now rook c6, defending the third rank, possibly defending this pawn in some cases. And it seems from here on out, for the moment, that Naka just tries to sort of hold this position and set up sort of a fortress where white can't really make any progress with this queen. He plays a5, a6, h4, rook c5, g3, rook c6. So just kind of the guys for a little while here, maybe to pick up some time on the clock, sort of just shuffle the pieces around here for a few moves. And well, let me just say back here, rook c5 after g3. This pawn is not on pre, because if it were to be taken, then queen c7 forks the rooks. So that pawn is protected via a tactic. So, okay, king b1, rook c5, king c2, rook c4. So just kind of chilling out here, king b3, rook c6. Black is sort of waiting around. He has to maintain protection of this pawn, which is now a fixed target since it can't really move forward. Well, it could, but at the moment it can't, because if it were ever to move at this point, then the rook would be taken. So g4 was played, and now forcing some exchanges here. Queen takes g4, rook c5, now really threatening the pawn because the queen can't get to c7, so he just goes back for that tactic. And actually here I thought, it looked to me like this pawn could actually be taken at first, because if rook takes a5, this I thought wasn't working because of the intermediate check, because of the king on b3. But it turns out that once the king moves and this rook moves, say to here, to attack this pawn, c4 actually traps the rook. It has no squares to go to. This square is covered by the queen, queen's covering this square, the pawn's covering this square, and the king has got these squares. So that actually still loses. So I probably in that position would have dropped a rook, but Naka saw all that, and instead of taking the pawn, played b6. So trying to break out in this position and get some play against the king. And now things start to get a little bit shaky for Grischuk. He plays queen a7, which looks like a nice move, attacking this pawn, attacking this rook. How's Nakamura going to deal with this? Well, he plays the move b takes a5 check, picking up a pawn, hanging this rook, but after queen takes b8 check, rook b5 check, picking the queen back up. And now we've come to a position where this is a king and pawn endgame that's probably lost for white. He's down a pawn, and it's going to be very tough for him because the black king is nicely posted to try to get in here and eat some of these pawns, or even in here to munch this pawn. And there's really nothing white can do to stop him from getting some of these pawns. So, for example, if he tries to come over and cover this square, king f5, king d3, covering the e4 square, well, soon white actually gets into zugzwang because he has some pawn moves. So a4, stopping the king from getting out here, stopping this pawn push, locking these two pawns down essentially. And what can black do? He can move here, but if he moves away, he's ceding ground to the king, and one way or another, the king's going to get into the position. Or even if king e2, the king can even come in here and just munch this pawn. So it's a tough position, and it's really zugzwang after e4 check, king f4. That's straight out zugzwang. There's no way for the king to maintain. There's no pawn moves. Well, I suppose he could move this pawn, but we do get something like this in the game, but you'll see that doesn't work out. So e4 check, and if the king moves anywhere, this pawn just falls. So it's very, very difficult position, and probably just losing for black. I'm not sure if there's some defense or not. I don't know if they have table bases that could do this, but I think if you saw with a table base, you'd see this is a lost king and pawn endgame. But it looked like there was a chance for Grischuk because he played the move c4, trying to exchange pawns and then get this pawn and trying to exchange c pawns, run the king over, grab this pawn, and run this b pawn home to the queening square. So Naka plays check, and now the last move of the game, not the last move of the game, but the final mistake of the game actually was to play c4 in the first place. But now after king takes c4, the game is actually just lost. This king and pawn endgame is losing, and it's kind of fun to see how it is losing. After king f5, if the king comes in here to try to stop the king from getting to a point where he could take the e-pawn, then the king just runs over here, grabs this pawn, and this pawn runs home. So there's no way to deal with that. And now after king b5, which was played in the game, we see a race to see which pawn will queen first. King e4, king takes a5, king takes e3, b4, and it looks like white is winning the race to the pawn. And he is, actually. He does queen first. After e4, b5, king f3, b6, e3, b7, e2, b8 equals queen, but it's still losing because after e1 equals queen check, the king can't come to b5 because then queen b1 check just picks up the queen. And he has to go either to b6 or a4, because if king comes here, b6 or a6, because if king comes here, then check, and we have the same problem. Regardless of where the king goes, the queen will be lost on the next move. And so he played the move king a6, and after queen a1 check, Grischuk resigned. The reason being, now the king is forced to go onto the a file, onto the b file, and once the king goes onto the b file, he can Naka can play either king b1 or king b2 check, queen b1 or queen b2 check, and after the king comes here, he exchanges queens, and now there's no stopping the e-pawn from running home and queening, and that's just game over. So a really interesting finish that had to be calculated, and I'm sure that it was calculated at some point that it was losing, but they played it out anyway. Naka had to be careful here not to move out of the way of the pawn onto this square, because then this would be a queen with check. But in fact, as long as he saw that after b5, king f3, b6, it's just one move slow for white, even though he queens first because of the queen with check and the tempo here. So a fun ending to that game, and Naka gets that win. So we'll just, I don't know, I guess we could briefly go over the game here. It was an Aliekin's defense, and white got some, sacrificed a pawn, which was taken here, for a lead in development and possibly some attack on the king, so getting castled. And now the real interesting point of the game comes here with rook takes d5, sacrificing the exchange for a pawn, and a nice square on e6 for the knight. So threatening checkmate here, that was just defended, bishop h6, now the knight comes into e6. These pieces come off, and so from here, the king's still in the center, white tries to just get some attack on the king, but Naka manages to hold off the attack via this exchange to a two rooks for the queen endgame, and sort of doesn't really play for much here, but sort of constructs a fortress. But after this move, perhaps in error, queen a7, the game gets a little bit difficult for white. After takes, winning the pawn, this king and pawn endgame is probably lost. So it went c4, and now the king and pawn endgame, of course, is completely lost. And it's just a fun race at the end that just manages to win for black. So, alright, interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.